Hello and welcome to the second episode of our Lange series. In the previous episode, we took a journey to the Dresden of the 1840s, witnessed the foundation, the development and the fall of the brand in 1945. Following, we discussed the rebirth of Lange Söhne by Walter Lange and Günter Blümlein in December the 7th, 1990. In this episode, we are going to look into the development of modern Lange Söhne from the 1990 to 1994 and the introduction of the first four pieces of the collection with a very deep dive. So please enjoy. Following the registration of Lange Uhren GmbH on December the 7th, 1990, Günter Blümlein and Walter Lange needed two things: a company site and qualified employees to craft the watches at the desired level. Unfortunately, none were readily available. Even though Walter Lange tried to purchase his old family house, he was denied because the rights of the house was transferred to GUB. Empty-handed, the founders hired another location at the upper side of the small town for the first atelier. On the other hand, Blümlein, busy with IWC and Jägerle Kultur at the same time, was looking for someone capable, trustworthy, who would run the business with Walter Lange while he is away. After some search, the duo agreed on Hartmut Knote. At the time, Knote was one of the senior managers of GUB. In 1991, Knote joined the team as the managing director of the brand. He was the perfect fit. He knew the region, the tradition, and had superb connection to the watchmakers in the region. As a GUB manager, he went through the area's transition himself. Therefore, he understood both the concerns and hopes of the people. The first Lange team flourished under the guidance of Walter Lange and Hartmut Knote. They handpicked each employee themselves. A delightful surprise for Walter Lange was many applicants' parents, grandparents worked for Lange Söhne in the past, and this brought a family mentality, which is still there even today, as many employees from those days still work for the company. Lange wanted to craft watches at the highest level, which was something quite different than the serially produced GUB pieces. Therefore, many watchmakers who hired for the first time were sent to Schaffhausen IWC to get training by the likes of Kurt Klaus. Mr. Klaus also visited Gloucester many times over the years to provide his invaluable guidance to the constructors and the designers. Apart from the hard skills, as with every venture, Lange needed culture. It was paramount to inject the ideals and values to the team, and this is where Walter Lange thrived. With the addition of Walter Lange's monumental stature to Blümlein's genius management, Lange Söhne was a result of a unique, undisputable fusion. In order to come up with watches that is going to stun the world, and to show that the company deserves the name of Lange once again, Lange Söhne had short 4 years ahead. The watchmaking philosophy of the brand was summarized by Blümlein in an interview with Peter Chong as follows: reference to the past of Lange Söhne, reference to the place of origin, Gloucester, Saxony and Germany, development and production of exclusive and the finest watches possible, and development and production of timepieces that offer real product benefit. Before moving on to the pieces, I believe it would be useful to have a picture of the industry back then as well. So, following the devastating quartz crisis, the watch industry rejuvenated itself during the 80s and the 90s by shifting the focus on luxury, status, tradition, instead of the previous tangible claims such as precision, accuracy, and so on. The business was thriving and companies turned their faces to grand complications. Patek Philippe celebrated its 150th anniversary in 1989 with a range of exceptional pieces, including the famous Caliber 89. Blancpain followed with the reference 1735 Grand Complication in 1991. IWC, a watchmaking powerhouse back then, unveiled Destriero Scafusia, the warhorse of Schaffhausen, in celebrations of its 125th birth year in 1993. As you can see, while in general Swiss watch industry was busy adding complications on top of each other and relying on traditional designs without foreign competition, something entirely different was cooking across the border. Following the re-registration in 1990 and 4 years of intense work, Lange Söhne introduced the first collection on the evening of 24th of October. For such an important collection, we couldn't just show you the photos. For you to better appreciate these special pieces that I have in front of me, we wanted to show you more. Showcased for the first time in private hands, it is my great pleasure to introduce the 1994 collection. The Lange one, the Saxonia, the Arkade, and of course, the biggest one, the Tourbillon Pour Le Mérite. Prior to the press release on the 24th, Lange invited 12 renowned jewelers from the German-speaking countries. On that night, the brand offered 123 pieces in total, and all were sold out within minutes. Walter Lange describes the event as the most stressful times of my life. I only relieved when I heard the applauses. One funny anecdote is, since Lange couldn't divide 123 pieces to 12 jewelers in equal numbers, the last 3 winners were determined by matchsticks. I guess the demand was strong, even from the start. Now, let's walk through each of these fantastic pieces, understand the making process, the reasoning behind, as well as the historical connections. Starting with the one and only, the Lange one. As a newcomer, Lange Söhne needed a statement to immediately reveal that they are nothing like ever before, that they respect to the past but not bound to it, that they craft at the very highest level. On top, they needed a face to attract immediate attention. The origins of the idea came from Blümlein and Mies. As I have listened from one senior Lange employee from the 90s, Blümlein and Mies would rotate the subdials and try new placements every day until they reached the final form. Lange 1 is a result of many elements combined in utter harmony. When one just takes a look at the dial, what you feel is a brilliant balance. On the dial we see hours, minutes, and then sub-second subdial, the big date, and of course the power reserve, all scattered through in the most non-random way possible. Indeed, the central portions of the subdials and the big date form an equilateral triangle. Such arrangement delivers a unique feeling of balance, even though all elements, again, are all over the place. Upon further examination, one realizes that Lange 1 is designed based on the rule of thirds. Precise German engineering's reflection on design, I guess. However, just far from being soulless. When you look at the Lange 1, obviously the first thing that grabs your attention is the big date, a reference to the past, as Blümlein would describe. Actually, a Jägerle-Coultre invention. Herr Lange and Blümlein took the patent from Lange's sister brand and transferred it to Glashütte, merging its history with the 5-minute clock in Dresden's Semper Opera House, which was made by none other than Gutkees, Ferdinand Adolf Lange's father-in-law. The big date is framed with a delightful golden window and printed with thick numerals. Next is the power reserve indication. Albeit simple looking, it is one of the finest examples of the brand's founding principles. In other words, offering a real utility. As you go closer into the details, you are going to see that the distance between the power reserve indication triangles actually are not equal. And the reason for that is to keep the watch as wound as possible. Just let me explain. So after a full wind, Lange was caliber offers officially 72 hours of power reserve. It takes 1.5 days approximately for the power reserve indication to cross the first 3 distant triangles. Interestingly, another 1.5 days or so to cross the last clause 2. It is arranged as such to trick the wearer to wind the watch more often, hence keep it wound to offer the best timekeeping that Lange 1 can offer. Just brilliant touch. Going closer, the subdials are given concentric circles to separate the surfaces from the main dial frame. Only revealed under a very careful look, such arrangement delivers a delightful depth to the dial and actually increases legibility. The use of Roman numerals might be contrasting with the contemporary outlook of the piece. However, the proportions, the accompanying elements such as diamond-shaped indices are so well done. You see something traditional carrying itself to become timeless. On the back, the first Lange 1 editions were presented with solid gold or platinum case backs, as it was the norm back then. Albeit Lange started to offer them with transparent case bags starting from 1995. We see that the solid case bag variants were on production until 1997 or so. When we open the cover, the first movement ever conceived by Lange Söhne, the caliber L901.0 greets us. The movement reference tells us that its work started in 1990. It is the first caliber of the year and the first variant of the movement. Here we see another masterful execution on how Lange Söhne is built on tradition, where it is beautiful. From the glacé ribbing on the German silver 3/4 plate, to blue screws, gold chatons, and the hand-engraved balance card. The handcraft pays its respects to the tradition, showcasing myriad of finishing techniques in every inch, signaling back then that Lange Söhne came back to claim the top. The caliber L90.0 is also distinctive due to its two little islands on the plate, which add a much-needed fun to the otherwise plain surface. This is because the Lange 1 movement is actually Jägerle Kultur's 822. Since Lange 1 is a dial-first design, the movement had to accompany. Thus, the cutout in the center is the cover for the Kalis works, and the one to the left is for the seconds hand. Measuring at a superb 38.5mm in diameter and 9.8mm in thickness, Lange 1 is as timeless on the wrist as well. Now, is Lange 1 an icon? If being something iconic means that it represents an idea, a way of life, a period, then I would say Lange 1 is the icon of modern watchmaking in Germany. It is one of the first 4 watches Lange Söhne introduced after almost 50 years of exile. A design that is completely unconventional and virtually unchanged since its birth. It conveys tradition and perfectly merges it with the Bauhaus artistic movement in a wristwatch. From its historical significance to its story and importance in the field, Lange 1 is truly one of the few icons of modern watchmaking. The next one is Arkade, a watch addressed mainly towards the women's market within the first offerings. Arkade measures at a modest 29mm in height and 22mm in width and 6.4mm in thickness. We recognize the diamond-shaped indices, Roman numerals, the big date, the subdial with concentric circles from the Lange 1, breathing this rather under-the-radar piece, the Lange Söhne soul. I'd like to quote from a connoisseur I highly regard who purchased this piece back in the 90s for his wife, simply because I think he summarizes this piece the best. He says, "I have emphasized to her that although it is a fine watch, perhaps the finest current production ladies watch available, it is understated and durable enough for everyday wear. If, for some reason, this line of thinking fails, I could take comfort in the realization that the Arkade's dimensions would make it entirely at home amongst the rectangular watches typical of 50 or 60 years ago, which are the designs I am also fond of." Turning the watch over again, a solid case back greets us. Upon opening the cover, we are marveled by a shaped movement to accompany the geometry of the Arkade. Caliber L9 11.4 is another Lange movement that is again based on Jagerli Kultre's A22. The view from the back is just fascinating though. Beneath the heavy gold layer, the movement fills the case perfectly and finished to perfection, retaining all signature elements of the brand. Offering 42 hours of power reserve and a big date, the Caliber L9 11.4 is certainly a serious movement on the technical front too. The solid caseback Arkade was produced only for 3 years. Among the 1994 collection, Arkade is possibly the hardest to find, simply because it was not on demand to justify high production numbers. Now, moving on to Saxonia, it is a watch that is filled with light motifs from the region, carriers of emotions, as Richard Wagner would say. And as his drama, the Saxonia collection doesn't use many elements, but everything it utilizes is an inseparable part of the whole story. 1994 was a revolution in German high-end watchmaking, and it wouldn't be more appropriate than identifying one part of it with its cradle, Saxonia. In my opinion, the first generation of Saxonia is the most Germanic watch Lange Söhne has ever produced. Small diamond markers surround the dial. There is nothing else like Roman or Arabic numerals. It is just the tradition, just the old school from the region. Further, Lange's custom serif type and the big date brings more character to this modest piece. Combined with its biscuit-like case, measuring at 33.9mm in diameter and 9.1mm in thickness, the watch is Teutonic, heavy and present. On the back, however, beneath the heavy gold plate, it hides a betrayal to one of the brand's founding principles. At the time, Blümlein knew that the collectors were getting bored of watches with 36, 37mm diameters, housing movements of 20mm, and seeing the same movement over and over again, if they ever get the chance, of course. Ergo, at the time of Rebirth, one of the brand's founding principles was one watch, one movement, which was broken right at the start. However, collectability arises from such quirks, and Saxonia offers a perfect one, because Lange changed it to a round movement only 2 years after, which you can find plenty, stopping the production of Saxonia pieces with shaped movements. And finally, we came to the last, but certainly not the least, a watch that represents Lange Söhne's philosophy towards watchmaking right from the start, the Tourbillon Pour Le Mérite. Some things worth much more than material or concrete outcomes. Of course, the end result has to be exceptional, but sometimes what matters more is the ideation. This watch has laid the foundations of what was going to be an exceptional movement manufacture, and without signaling such ambition from the very beginning and cementing the doctrine within the company, Lange Söhne wouldn't be the company that we know today. Tourbillon Pour Le Mérite, hence the Caliber L9 02.0, is the backbone of every invention, innovation, and the ambition of Lange Söhne to come up with the best possible. Tourbillon Pour Le Mérite is the world's first wristwatch to offer a fusee and chain, a system that offers the uniform torque throughout the power reserve. The watch is the brainchild of Blümlein, Mice, and Renaud & Papy. As mentioned, Tourbillon Pour Le Mérite was meant to be a trailblazer, yet at the time when Lange was a startup, there was neither enough know-how nor the time to build a mechanism of this magnitude without outside assistance. Thus, Blümlein reached out to an old friend of his, who is possibly the widest known specialist in movement design today, Renaud & Papy. Mr. Papy states that Blümlein asked Renaud & Papy on what kind of a movement they should create to erase the 50 years of inactivity of the brand. When the project was done, all 200 calibers were made in Renaud & Papy ateliers, and finish and second assembly was done in Glasgow. Its fusee and chain consist of 636 individual parts and revealed through the cutouts on the movement. As you might guess, on the contrary to Lange 1, Tourbillon Pour Le Mérite was a movement-first watch. A glance to Tourbillon Pour Le Mérite reveals that with its Arabic numerals, railway minute track, and 3 dots in each 15-minute markers, it is part of the 1815 collection. Its traditional look, combined with some of the finest technical advancements of its time, which forms a stark yet delightful contrast. Arched Lange Söhne logo crowns the glass-stained Saxonia inscription below and beautifully balances the extra-large tourbillon opening at 6 o'clock. The subdials sit on the central axis, the small seconds on the left and power reserve on the right. The discrete tourbillon text on the small second subdial nicely counterweighs the power reserve indications numerals. The steel tourbillon bridge is superbly chamfered and carries multiple sharp angles. The black polish on the carriage strongly stands against the bright, faceted diamond in the middle. 3 arms of the tourbillon carry superbly cut out internal angles and proofs of hand finish. All in all, an extremely important piece of history, limited to 106 pieces in yellow gold. One can say that Tourbillon Pour Le Mérite is the most collectible Lange Söhne watch ever made. Following the brilliant launch, now it was time for Lange Söhne to develop the collection and solidify their position even further. This would come in 1999 and in our next episode. Thank you very much.